Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Midwest Mythos, and I got a special guest for y'all this week. Vicki Joy, how's it going?
It is going, man. It's going great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Now, if people are not familiar with you, which I'm pretty sure most of the listeners are by this point, either from me talking about you on this show before or they listen to similar shows, know what you're about. But for those who do not, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
That's right. I am the kooky sleep paralysis lady, a moniker I bear with pride. Oh, I no, my latest book put out through Spiral of Life Press, which is Ellie Marzulli's publishing site, is on sleep paralysis. But it's by no means the only thing that I'm interested in or that I can speak on or that I have researched. But most of the podcasts that most people who have heard me, they're probably going to have heard the sleep paralysis stuff where we talk about astral projection and out of body and a lot of the more new age esoteric stuff. But I love talking about anything supernatural through the biblical perspective. And it is amazing to me, pretty much any bizarre topic you can bring up there's somewhere where you can at least speculate with pretty fair certainty that there truly is nothing new under the sun. And there's at least allusions to the fact that people in the first century or before at least believed some of the same things that we did. There's allusions to sleep paralysis in Job chapter 4 with Eliphaz, and there's allusions to traveling interdimensionally through the Abrahamic covenant and Paul and Ezekiel portals. You see portals in Ezekiel. You see a belief in the witching hour and ghosts when they saw Jesus walking on the water. Really, anything, and I'm not saying eisegesis, I'm not saying come up with any crazy topic and then like pound it into the scripture. But
Mhm.
what I'm saying is for those that are astutely looking at the scriptures, not through just like the lenses of stoicism or the scientific method, it is a profoundly supernatural book.
No doubt about that. No doubt about that. And I have to make a quick comment on that. Is you are the second person I've ever heard talk about the portals that are opened up in with Ezekiel.
Yep, yep.
I, I
And you
had
know what's crazy? And I love this. I'm not saying there's not more than one of them, but when you're specifically talking about visitations of Christ, whether he is in the form of the angel of the Lord, the form of Yahweh, the pre-incarnate Messiah, when you're looking at like Christophanies, where either Christ came down to earth or someone went into that dimension, not only is there evidence of portals in scripture, but more often than not, it's specifically at the Mount of Olives.
yeah.
So we see Ezekiel taken to the mountain east of Jerusalem, which is Mount of Olives. So Ezekiel through the river, he's by the river Kibar in Babylon. Now all of a sudden he's in Jerusalem. Now all of a sudden he's back and he's going from that mountain in the east. We have Jesus ascending into heaven on the Mount of Olives. We have his resurrection is there as well, because if you read the work of Rabbi Zev Porat in his book Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit, he gives a lengthy argument that the actual garden tomb of Jesus Christ isn't where the tourist trap is. It was actually originally on the Mount of Olives. And he is a born, bred, and raised Jewish man living in Israel. And he's got his facts. And there's definitely that's where he's going to return. And so there's definitely something going on. I think we can at least agree that Hermon and Olives has got some strange goings on.
I can agree with that. Oh, I'm gonna have to look into that guy. It
Yeah, yeah, really knowledgeable guy. He works a lot with Pastor Carl Gallups, who runs a church out of Florida and who publishes a lot of books with Defender Publishing. And Carl Gallups is the one that kind of introduced Zev Parat to our Melu.
oh, that's awesome. It ain't that funny how it works. Just it's the connections that we make, and I mean
Yeah,
that's how God designed it.
that's right. You know what? This I would say this podcasting community is an extension of that milieu. So, you've got the Marzulis and the Heisers and the Gary Waynes, and you've got that community, right?
Mhm.
And then you've really, I believe that the podcast community is an extension of that milieu. And we've gathered a lot of momentum in the last 10 years or so here. And we were talking before we hit record. It's an exciting time to be alive.
It is. I mean, you got the guys at Blurry Creatures making the moves. You got everybody over at Merkle Media.
Merkel.
It some I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's gonna be, but something big is gonna come out of the connections just made from all these different groups.
Yeah, absolutely. There is strength in numbers indeed. And I think I love that verse in Jeremiah where the nations have this aha moment and they say, surely we have inherited lies. And what's scary about that is that's the nations, that's the Gentiles, that's potentially even the Christian church
Hmm.
figuring out that the seminary approved answers to things aren't necessarily what was really culturally and contextually happening in our scriptures. But rather than being terrified by that, because it can be very disorienting when we get red pilled. We got to hold on to our, hold on for the ride, put on the seatbelt.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, what an amazing opportunity that's going to be if we're the generation that's alive when some of these more esoteric, arcane, hidden uh, things that have been in the shadows for so long come out, and it's finally the time to be revealed. Like, for example, in the book of Enoch 1, it says, like, it starts out by saying this is a revelation for the last generation. So I don't even get wrapped up in whether or not it should be inspired word of God, whether or not it should be in the Bible or not, because in a way, it never should have been in the Bible because it specifically says this is for the last generation. So it it is interesting to me that all of a sudden everybody and their brother knows about this book of Enoch, even if you're not saved. I about 6 months ago, I was getting my nails done in a rural city, and a man from Vietnam who was a self-proclaimed Buddhist just flat out starts talking to me about the book of Enoch. Hey, you heard of the book of Enoch? And he is going on, he's buying into it hook, line, and sinker. And I'm like, what is happening in our planet right now that where people of every race and religion are all of a sudden aware of this book that specifically was designated for the last generation. What does that mean? We don't know, but it's exciting.
It is. And I really didn't think about that until you just brought that up. There is, I mean, even before I got saved 4 years ago, I was it was like right when Enoch started becoming uh, mainstream.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just remember talking with some people and they were like, yeah, I've been looking about that too. And I was like, that's weird because we don't believe in God, but we're reading the word. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
it's apophica, but at some point it was, well, I mean, if you look at the Ethiopian church, it's still in their Bible. I mean,
Yep.
so
Continuously. It was in the 1611 and prior King James. Interesting. And you know what? Maybe it was sovereignly removed. And it depends on too what you mean by the final generation, because in in God's estimation of time, if you're looking at this through more quantum, eternal, dimensional lenses, the last generation, from his perspective, could be 1,000 years. So even if it had been, you know, it, let's say it came out into public view like 10 years ago, we could just be at the very beginning of that final generation. I don't know. I don't pretend to know. I'm not wrapped up in that. I don't get all uptight when people talk about eschatology. I don't care what people's eschatology is. Look, all I know is whether Jesus comes back tomorrow or he comes back when I'm 80 or he comes back after I'm dead. He's coming back for me. And if the worst case scenario is I get thrown in a FEMA camp, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And look, I'm not being trite about that. I do hope that if I ever am called to be in a martyr situation, that he will anoint me for that and he will give me more strength than I have sitting in my chair right now. I am by no means talking blithely about how terrifying that would be, but I know he's faithful. And I know that if he calls me to do that, he'll equip me to do that. So I'm not concerned. And my desire for him to come back is I want to see him. And I'm tired of the ridiculousness of this world being ruled by people who hate God. And I'm tired of the corruption and the sickness and the perversion. And I want Jesus to come back and claim his throne. But uh, if I break a few nails in the process, que sera, sera, I'll break a few nails for Jesus, right? He'll get us through. He'll get us through. And our life is a vapor. And I am not going to beat the word into an eschatology that is safe and comfortable for me just so that I can feel better.
Yeah.
I trust him. And I'm not saying that everybody that has certain eschatologies are doing it for that purpose, but what I'm saying is I'm not afraid of any of the potential outcomes because he's proven himself faithful to me too many times for me to think that he's going to abandon me at that point. So it doesn't matter to me if he comes in the middle, at the end, or the beginning.
Amen to that. That's it. That goes along with like the two things I always say is, well, one of the things going back to something you said a little earlier was I believe it's John. He talks about if we were to write down every miracle that Jesus has done, there would be enough books to cover the world, and the world would not be enough to do it. So, I mean, there's just we think we know it all just because we have the Bible, but it and I could be wrong. And Lord, forgive me if this is not all the way true, but I truly believe the Bible is the guideline to get to the relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
It is the Old Testament is showing how we got there, the foundation of everything, because everybody wants to have a foundation in it, whatever they're going to believe. That is the foundation. To lead us to the foundation of Christ is our cornerstone in our
Amen.
lives.
Amen.
So when people try to limit things in Christ to what the word says, there's I don't know, from my interpretation of what I've read, there's so much more Christ can do than just
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at how far removed we've become from the culture, the history, the language, the geography of the text, I mean, we do our best as 21st century Americans, but it is it would be so hard to truly understand the culture and the context of the first century. We think we know
mm-hmm.
all about Jesus's time and the language that they were speaking and all the pronunciations and the culture and the geography and the history and the language, but we really don't. And that doesn't bother me because that is what allows for discovery. When the Holy Spirit reveals stuff to us, we get so excited. I mean, you know how it is when you're reading the Bible and you're reading something you've read a million times, and all of a sudden something just like leaps off the page and punches you in the face. I mean, you're like, we live for those moments. That every day when we open the Word, that's what we want. We want some sort of like aha moment. Those are the things that give us our goosebumps. And so, if the Lord just downloaded us to where we did understand everything, yes, it would avoid confusion, it would avoid bickering and division, and it would avoid a lot of deception on behalf of the enemy. But it would also eliminate the joy of discovery and that intimacy that we have with the Lord when we read and He shows something just to us.
Yeah, exactly. And uh, my my buddy, he was telling me about a vision the Lord gave him one night, and he he was laying there, and he just saw the whole sky, and it was a bunch of screens, and it was everything. And he's like, he said the Lord told him, if you can find, this is just the base level. If you can find the one that you're supposed to find, you can go to the next level. So he finds it, and then he goes up, and then the screens multiply in the next level. And he's like, you will never be able to get past this. He's like,
Mm.
the first level, that is all that I have done that y'all know about. It is infinite to what I have done, all creation. You would not, even if you had all of time, you would never even get the smallest portion of everything that I have done. It is
Mm.
incomprehensible for you to know. So, keep on striving. How he took it, this was a while. So if I'm getting a little wrong, buddy, I'm sorry. I know you're listening, but take what the Lord shows you and learn it and hold on to it. But just know you are not God. You are not meant to know all that there is. Each of us have our own roles. I believe I was I'm awful with names when it comes to the Bible, but Nehemiah or Nehemiah went out to go gather the materials and the people to build the wall for the kingdom. That's, to me, that's like one of my favorite stories of what I'm, at least me personally, what I'm supposed to be doing is going out there, meeting the people, giving the people what they need so that they're able to do what they need for the kingdom of God. Let the Spirit flow through me, using me as a conduit to do what God wants to do.
Amen. Amen. I love the imagery of Nehemiah if you're American. I think that the Jewish people say Nehemiah. I always thought that was cool the first time I heard that. But yeah, I love the imagery of Nehemiah where they're building the wall, they're building the kingdom. They got the hammer in one hand, they got the sword in the other. And it's so apt to, if you go out there and you want to build up the kingdom of heaven, you better have a sword in one hand too, because there will be warfare. And that's another reason why the supernatural, having been stripped out of the church and out of seminaries, yeah, you miss a lot of the really cool things that we're now discovering and enjoying in these podcasts, but you're also the church is bereft of the seriousness of how much spiritual warfare can really be leveled at them. And there's a lot of people in the church that are dealing with things that they could easily free themselves from if they would just understand that that is an attack against them and that they do have the authority. I think a lot of us, we just think everything that's coming at us is just organically part of our life and we have to deal with it, or, God, you got to help us out of this. But I'm just becoming sort of painfully aware since having a public ministry and being told by so many Christians that there's no such thing as spiritual warfare and there's no such thing as being attacked by demons in your sleep and there's no such thing as all this stuff, because as soon as you pray to receive Jesus, you get Wonder Woman bracelets and everything just deflects off of you. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that has not been my experience. So, according to some people's doctrine, I guess I'm not really a Christian, but gee, the New Testament sure has a lot of information about spiritual warfare for people that supposedly don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perfect example when some of the when some people went and tried to cast demons out and the demons thrashed them and they're like, I know Paul and I know Jesus, and they're calling out to Jesus, but he's like, you don't know you.
Yeah.
You don't, I mean, that's New Testament.
Yep.
That's, I mean, it may have been physical, but I mean, spiritual warfare now is physical too. I,
Very much so.
I'm not, I, I don't get I'm not saying my ide- my ideology and my faith is superior. I'm not holier than thou by any means whatsoever.
No.
But just from what I've taken of the scriptures, there's no reason we should not still be active in it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hmm.
So I know that was quite a bit of an intro. Perfectly fine. That was awesome. And I think it does tie perfectly into sleep paralysis.
Very much so. Speaking of spiritual warfare, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'll just start by giving like a little definition because, I do think that a majority of people, especially ones that, track with podcasts like this, probably do know what it is, probably have experienced it at least once in their lifetime as well. But I always like to clarify at the get-go so people know that they're not dealing with a Neanderthal. There's nothing demonic about times when we're asleep, sleep phases where we're paralyzed. Okay. That's part of our physiology. And there's absolutely such thing as waking up, jolting awake out of REM and nothing scary happens at all, right? We've all had those experiences. The cat wakes you up, the alarm wakes you up, the kids, start screaming. We'll jolt awake a little bit too quickly. Uh, Sometimes we'll have it as we're drifting off to sleep. We're drifting off so slowly that we kind of have that sense like I'm almost asleep, and it's very peaceful, almost enjoyable. So, what we're more accurately talking about when we talk about sleep paralysis, I will contend to my dying day that whoever came up with that phrase, it's not a good phrase. Sleep paralysis is not a good phrase. Because we all have sleep paralysis numerous times a night. There's nothing bizarre about it. What
Mhm.
we're actually talking about, and when people say I had sleep paralysis last night, what they mean, if we're being intellectually honest with each other, is I experienced some sort of spiritual, dimensional, astral, or demonic attack during a time last night when I was paralyzed. And so there is a lot of misinformation, I believe, in what sleep paralysis is, where it is happening, when it's happening. But before I launch into that, I do just want to clarify for people who may have never heard of it, what what the average person experiences is they have a sense that they're awake in their bedroom, but they're kind of trapped somewhere between being awake and being asleep. They can't move unless they can move maybe their eyes. Uh, they will say anything from, I feel like I'm being suffocated, I'm being choked, I can't breathe, I'm having a heart attack. There's something sitting on my chest. Sometimes I can see it, sometimes I can't. As well as a myriad of different entities that people claim to see, which is um, the Hat Man, the Shadow Man, the Incubus, the Succubus, the woman in the rocking chair, the alien grays, the black mists, the red eyes, on and on and on. Some people see spiders, uh, animals, snakes. Some people see geometric shapes, occult symbols, blinking lights, things like that. And that is really the experience of Gen X, baby boomers, some millennial, but the younger generations are explaining different things to me. They are getting more of a metaverse experience than an astral experience. They're getting more of a, uh, they won't necessarily say Shadow Man, Hat Man. They'll say, I saw something that looked like, and then it's usually something, it's a film reference. I saw something that looked exactly like Voldemort. I saw something that looked exactly like Darth Maul, Gollum, fill in the blank for like these classic, media villains.
Mhm.
And what I think is happening there is these entities they are very intelligent, and I believe that they have always been able to package themselves in cultural folklore. So here in America, we expect to see the Shadow Man and the Hat Man and that kind of thing. Whereas if we're in another country, it might look like a banshee, or it might look like a jinn, it might look like something else according to their folklore. Now, what's happening, even within the context of our own culture here in America, because of the generational shift, is the older generations are seeing more of the classic sleep paralysis entities that they expect to see. And the younger generations are seeing what's relevant to their folklore, which is media. It's video games, it's anime, it's movies. And so that's what they're seeing.
Mhm.
Because these things, uh, you know, they're also kind of switching their tactic with the younger generation. Uh, Gen X and older, we were raised in a generation where our grandparents came back from World War II. They went through hardship. They did not complain. They didn't, a lot of them were coming over from European countries where there was a lot more of like a stoic personality. You grin and bear it. They came through hard times. They survived deathly winters and barns burning down. And so when you are the grandchild of and the child of that type of a generation, uh, when you were a kid, you didn't complain. Your feelings didn't matter. You just did what your parents told you to do, and if you didn't, you were in trouble. And uh, you went to school whether you liked it or not. You ate your dinner whether you liked it or not. And if you had to sit at that table till 9 p.m. until you finished it and then they packed it in your lunch the next day, you weren't going to win that battle. You were eating that stuff. So these entities are smart enough. What they want is to draw people in. And so with the older generations, they drew us in through secrecy and fear. We're going to isolate you because if you say out loud what happened, you're going to be ostracized. You're going to be schizophrenic or you're going to be demon possessed. The church will come after you or the doctors will come after you. And so if you want to self-preservate, you're going to keep this a secret. So it was our inability and our lack of desire to share that kind of stuff that kept us isolated and then kept us vulnerable. Whereas now we have a generation full of younger people who have spent their entire lives sharing all of their thoughts and feelings and emotions with the world online.
Yep.
There's no barrier there, right? And so you can't manipulate the younger people the same way you could manipulate the older generations. Because if you scare the crap out of a younger kid, they're going to get online and they're going to say, holy crap, I saw this and I saw that. And everyone's going, I saw that too. And then their covert operation is over, right? So what they're doing is the classic case of you can draw more flies with honey than vinegar, that kind of a thing. So my generation got the vinegar. You're going to swallow this medicine and you're going to like it and you're not going to complain. Whereas now it's more of a wooing or a grooming. It is more of a, we're going to draw you in. Look at this metaverse we've created for you. There's this world. You can come at night and you can explore the Harry Potter universe or the DC Marvel universes or the Star Wars universe, the Lord of the Rings universe, and it becomes an extension of their waking hours, which is virtual.
Yep.
It it's just an AR world. So the astral realm, the AR of my generation was the astral realm, and the AR of the newer generations, the younger generations, is the augmented reality, which is a real thing. And so these kids already know how to navigate in these dimensional and these liminal spaces because they're being trained in the waking hours. It's an extension. There's less of a demarcation between the waking and the sleeping hours for the younger generation because we also now live in a world. What facilitates astral travel is altered states of consciousness, which is why when you're asleep, fading in and out of REM and sleep cycles, you hit for momentary pieces of time, you hit altered states of consciousness, which is where they can slip in.
Yep.
But we now live in a world where we could potentially, depending upon our habits, and even if we don't have certain habits, we are potentially not in a sober-minded, vigilant beta state during waking hours anymore either, because we are constantly drugging ourselves, for lack of a better word for it, on sugar and all sorts of things that can affect our brain. We have a lot of people that are medicated with over-the-counter or psychotropic, as well as we've got a lot of people very much embracing THC and the gummies and sleeping pills and melatonin. You've got all of the electromagnetic stuff going on. You've got the Wi-Fi. You've got so many invisible things affecting the brain and the brain waves and the dopamine and serotonin and melatonin levels in our brains. And the the demon world, they have human physiology and psychology figured out.
It,
They know what makes us tick. They know what we want. People are always like, the devil can't read your mind. And I say, who cares? You know, anyone who's a parent with a 5-year-old, do you have to read that 5-year-old kid's mind? When you see that guilty look on his face and a little bit of chocolate coming off the side of his mouth and the cookie jar, like you figured it out, it doesn't take a brainchild. And it's the same thing. They don't have to read our minds. If you have observed mankind for thousands of years, there's a few things that we think about all day long. And we're basically spending all day long thinking about when can I get a nap? When can I get a can of pop? When can I get something to eat? When can I take a break? When can I go to sleep? When basically, not to be crude, this is just the way it is. We have a certain number of holes in our body, and we just spend most of our life thinking about what we're going to stuff in what hole. That's really
Yeah,
human existence.
it really is, and it's insane. And I will say it. I agree with you. So I'm part of the the younger generation, early 20s, but I do see all this. I'm like looking back, thinking about all the stuff that I've done. So I remember in high school, my friend was like, "Hey Riley, you gotta try these binaural beats, man. You're gonna have the wildest time of your night, like during your sleep." So I would go to bed listening to all these different frequencies, and at the same time, because I had insomnia in high school, I was taking. I didn't know that when you take melatonin, you're only supposed to take 1 to 2 milligrams. I was taking 40 milligrams of melatonin a night just to help me get to sleep.
Whoa.
So on,
Plus the binaurals. Oh my gosh.
and then once I got to like 18, 19, uh, I was in the gym. I was smoking pot at the time. My buddy, he was like, "Hey man, you gotta try meditating." So I turned on these chakra chakra frequency things. Like, not that I believed in the chakras or anything like that, but I was like, "Hey, I remember these binaural beats. Let's just get them frequencies going." And I just remember sitting in bed for hours in the middle of the night after either smoking or having some like CBD or something like that, and I would just sit there and just let my mind wander and go wherever. And I'm not seeing the repercussions of it until like 2 3 years ago.
Yes. Yep. So I'm really glad you brought up the binaural beats. That's like one of my pet topics. I geek out on this stuff. So I talk a little bit in my book about Robert Monroe. He's now passed away, but the Monroe Institute is still around.
Mm-hmm.
He was known as the father of modern, or like the father of astral projection, or something like that. And he actually started out as a broadcaster. But then he started doing, it started out where he was doing studies that I think had to do with like auditory beats and things for like the deaf. And then it turned into like sleep studies, things like that. He ended up choosing himself as the sleep, for the sleep experiments. And what he discovered, even though it's been around for millennia, is he was astral projecting. And he is the one in the 80s that during the Cold War trained one small unit of the US Army how to astral project. Now, they didn't call it that because they decided that that had too much of like a spiritual, religious sort of connotation. And so they came up with this more politically correct sounding phrase. They called it remote viewing, which is still done in the military. But what's interesting about these binaural beats, they back when Monroe studied them, he called it brain entrainment. And hemisync technology is what he called it when he copywrote it for his own purposes. And so what it was is the same thing as these binaural beats. The right and the left hemisphere both kind of buzz at their own frequency. They don't buzz at the same frequency, and they're not supposed to. God didn't design it that way. They have different frequencies that complement and balance one another out. Now, what happens is if you play inaudible third tones in between two tones, the brain will pick up on it. You won't necessarily auditorily pick it up, but your brain will pick up on it. And what happens is it synchronizes the left and the right brain hemisphere, and it begins to buzz at the same frequency. It levels out. Now, what happens when you do that is it opens the third eye, or it affects the pineal gland, however you want to say this, but it thins the veil. This is where people can have out-of-body experiences. They can astral project. And so if you are combining binaural beats with medication, even if it's NyQuil. You hear all these people, the TikTok hashtag with the hat man
Yeah,
down in the Benadryl.
take that Benadryl.
But pick your drug, man. It doesn't have to be Benadryl. It can be anything. If you OD on anything like a sleeping pill, and especially if you're adding it like binaural beats or meditation, or you're adding even some of that, it gets really interesting. Even if you study ASMR. Now, some people when they listen to those videos get like the tingles. I don't, but they actually have done some medical studies on it. And what some medical journals have said is that if you get those tingles when you listen to ASMR, it actually can medically qualify as mini seizures. That's how your brain is interpreting it. Now, this is interesting because if you know anything about like a Kundalini awakening, like when the third eye gets opened, when people do various tantric yoga and things like that to try to get the coccyx, it's putting pressure on that coccyx, and it's supposed to uncoil the serpent, and bang, it comes up and it opens your third eye, right? That's the esoteric Kundalini, way of explaining it. But when people explain a Kundalini awakening, and man, I had all this stuff in the first draft of my book, and I think I ended up pulling it out. It got just a little bit too much of a rabbit trail. But anyway, when people describe a Kundalini awakening, it very much, from a cerebral point of view, mimics how someone would describe having a seizure. It is probing like lights up in the brain, and they're very similar. And there is all sorts of intertwined esoteric stuff between seizures, Kundalini awakenings, MK Ultra mind control programming, and all the things like if you've read about the Montauk experiments, there was a very, very particular type of SA that would facilitate that mind control. And what's fascinating to me now, and I want to be very careful with my words here because I don't want everybody out there who has the actual physical ailment of epilepsy to think that every single time someone has a seizure, it's something occult going on. No, there is actually such thing as epilepsy. But the demon world loves to hide behind the side effects of other pre-existing conditions so that you'll never find the demonic element intertwined with it, because it's like, this is like all the bullet points. This has got to just be this disease.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is what's really interesting. About 3 or 4 years ago, all the major news outlets reported this story. And if the AP releases something and all the news sources take it and run with it, it's something they want in the collective conscience, right?
Right.
We were told that a 3,000-plus-year-old cuneiform tablet was unearthed in the ruins of some library in Egypt or something to that effect. And it was a medical tablet. And it was sort of a gaslighting of like, look how stupid people were back then. Ha ha ha, we've come so far now. But think of it in terms of, why did the Associated Press want millions of people in the 21st century to know this? What they said is that the medical tablet revealed that the ancient people believed that epilepsy was the result of a demon who went by the name of Bennu. An epilepsy demon. Now, again, I want everyone to hear me saying, if you have epilepsy, it doesn't mean you're possessed by Bennu, right? In fact, it was actually called Beno epilepsy, Benu-epilepsy. It was a very specific kind.
Mm-hmm.
So not to be confused with what we would call epilepsy. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In the book of Matthew and one other gospel, I believe Mark, we have the story of the father who takes his demon-possessed boy to the disciples. They fail to cast the demon out, so he brings the boy to Jesus. And he says, my son is always throwing himself into the fire and into the water. And he's had this demon since childhood. And Jesus casts the demon out of him and he's cured. But what's fascinating is if you go onto like a Bible Hub, one of these like online Bibles that gives all the translations kind of at a glance,
Mhm.
it's really interesting when you read that passage in all of the English translations at once. In some passages, it'll say, my son has a demon. In some, it will say, my son has epilepsy. In some, it'll say, my son has seizures. And then there's these more arcane translations that say, my son has a lunatic spirit. One says, my son is moonstruck. So now we're getting into demonic entities that can transfer into human beings during, say, a solstice ritual where ancient people were worshiping moon gods. Maybe that's where this kid picked it up. Maybe old dad brought him to a little ritual. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so we have all of these things, but going back to the binaural beats, we have got nefarious audio now. Now, yes, you can go onto YouTube and say, I'm going to avoid all these frequency videos because they're bad and they can have I don't want a Kundalini awakening. I don't want an out of body experience, you know. But here's the deal. How do we know if this is just something the brain picks up, not necessarily the ear? How do we know? And this is where my conspiratorial paranoia, you know, comes out. How do I know that in the last 20 years, where all of a sudden every album that's ever been produced in the last 50 years got digitally remastered
Yeah.
for our benefit, because they want to spend billions of dollars re-releasing every album that's already been released because they really care about our enjoying our sound quality, right?
Hmm.
How do I know that part of that agenda to digitally remaster all of the albums was not a layering in of another track of binaural beats? How do I know that every music I listen to, and now I've got wireless earbuds jammed into my head that's attracting electromagnetic energy, there's binaural beats potentially layered in my music, I'm drinking my energy drink full of chemicals. How do I not know that I'm not chemically setting up all of the pins for demonic communication?
That, yeah. Well, going to the digitally remastered, I can't, I don't know if it was Led Zeppelin with Zeppelin 3 or if it was the Beatles with, what album was that? It was one of their albums that, so most people back then apparently like would fall asleep listening to records. Well, during the center of the record, they had it etched in there to where it would make a frequency, and people reported having like night terrors or just like the weirdest dreams ever, just letting that track run. And later on, the whatever band it was came out and said, yeah, we did that on purpose, we wanted to mess with people.
Yeah.
But if it was Zeppelin, like, I think you get into the whole thing with Jimmy Page selling his soul to become what he, it's it's insane. Like, even just the last 70 years, this plan of the enemy, if what we're talking about right now is true, and what you're mentioning now with you got your earbuds in all the time, it's it's insane to think about.
It really is. Like I said, they have our physiology figured out. They know our brain and the chemicals, and they know. Uh, in fact, like I've read a lot about meth because I do have a close family relative who has that addiction, and so I was attempting back in college actually to learn more about it. And uh, I believe it was meth, but I know that there are other drugs as well. There are certain drugs that actually carve new neural pathways into your brain. So they're actually like carving neural pathways into the brain that weren't there when the brain was developed in the womb, right? And so God only knows. There's so much we don't know about the brain, and if it's true what they say, we only actually use 10% of it. What in the world is that about? That has always fascinated me.
Hmm.
And are some of these things that are being introduced to us innocently as just entertainment, are some of these video games, VR goggles, earbuds, whatever. And I'm genuinely asking a question, because I'm not of this belief. I'm just genuinely asking the question: do the powers that be out there that want control know how to tap into those parts of the brain that perhaps God roadblocked for a purpose? And is that playing partially into some of the insanity that we are seeing amongst mankind? And lest you think I'm reading between the lines here, I'm not even talking about political stuff. We're recording this the day after the election. I'm not even talking about that. When I say people are going insane, I mean that the number of people self-diagnosing and medicating for depression, self-harm, anxiety. We now have a DSM-5 that's bigger than a phone book, and we have to be inventing new mental illnesses on the daily because of all of the things that are suddenly an issue that no one's heard of before.
Yeah,
And so it makes me wonder, you know, I think that if we were to pray and say, okay, God, reveal to us every single thing that's a gateway, I think we'd be shocked, because I think there would be even things that we've let into the church. And I mean, I'm talking all sorts of things. And, I'll just give you a little bit of a personal story. When I got red pilled, I think it started around 2014. And I sort of had a hard time with it. I was going crazy. I started reading about all of the symbols, all the occult symbols. And once you know what a lot of them are, you see them everywhere. Like they're on
yeah,
your clothes, they're on your shoes, and I remember being in the car, and I was, I think, on like a vacation, and my dad was driving. I mean, this was just back in like 2015, 2014. And we were driving down a major freeway, where like the semis are. So all of the restaurants and gas stations had all their lit up signs that go way up into the sky. Every single one of them, the occult symbology was like leaping off at me, just like my brain was picking up on them. And I had a moment of instability. Like it was the point in the movie where the main character is like, no, 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 and I I was kind of freaking out, because I realized, oh my gosh, this guy, this enemy of God, has his fingerprints on everything. He owns this place. His name, his signature, his autograph is everywhere. All of the Saturn rings and the sunbeams and the Ra and the sun worship and all of this stuff and the sixes and now I can look at that stuff and go like, oh brother, whatever. But when I first woke up to it and saw that it was absolutely everywhere, it was a mind-numbing experience for me. And we only at this point have had a little bit of this stuff revealed to us.
yeah.
If they came out with everything that they've been putting under our nose for the last 50 to 75 years, I think we'd all be in straitjackets, like honestly.
Probably. Well, I'm having this experience at work right now because I've done taking the red pill, and I it's been quite a few years now, and so I've been looking into this stuff since middle of high school, early high school, and um, So about 10 years now. And I was talking to my coworker, and he's real big into sports and stuff like that. And I'm not gonna say he like idolizes some of the athletes, but he has some that he really, really likes. And we were just talking there, and I'll say it, I'm not afraid to say it on the show, but he's a big fan of like LeBron James and stuff like that. And
Okay.
he's like, "Oh, dude, this dude's awesome," and stuff like that. And I'm like, "All right, man, we good enough friends now. I'm gonna open this world to you," because me and another coworker have been telling him about Christ and just all the stuff that's happening in the world, because he's asking questions, so we're just giving him the truth. And I'm like, "Hey man, like look at this. See this thing that he always does every single time. Look at the clothes that you're wearing that he's got on it." I was like, "These are the connections with these people, and these people are part of this cabal or these ritual groups, Luciferian, or whether any of these demonic entities that these elites, and it's not just the elites, there's everyday people like you and I who are involved in this kind of stuff too, but I'm showing it to them." And I started to notice, even after just giving them like, I started lifting the lid off the barrel, uh he just like, it looked like his whole world had just, he looked like his brain was about to explode. The at the mention of adrenochrome and him asking what it was and me telling him, he was like, "All right, man, like we're good for today." He's like, "I believe you, and it makes sense, but like no more right now." Like,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
I'm kind of spoon feeding him a little bit, just trying
Yeah.
to wake him up to everything. And I see God doing that in his life as well.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
it's just like, if, like you just said, if everybody had that happen, we'd all be in straitjackets.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's crazy too. I remember in junior high, this is hilarious. I went to a private school. It was just sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and they brought all the sixth, seventh, and eighth graders into the church sanctuary, and we had a special guest speaker, right? So this is like what, 82 maybe, and it was it was right around the time that Thriller had come out. So it was like that huge, huge like Michael Jackson era. And heavy metal was on the scene, but maybe a couple years from kind of taking over everything.
Mhm.
So like I know like Quiet Riot was out there, Ozzy, of course, Black Sabbath, but not a lot of junior high kids were into that stuff quite yet. That came a couple years later for most of the kids. But this guy came in and played little samples of different songs and tried to convince us that, all of these singers were trying to get us to want to hurt ourselves and whatever. And, it's really fascinating. In retrospect, now as an adult, I have a whole bunch of different thoughts on that experience. And on one hand, because we were kids, we thought it was nonsense. And part of it was that maybe we didn't want to believe it because back then, like rock music was a big deal. And this was a Christian school. So don't tell us, like, don't let our parents hear this, right? And so, but what another thing that I've noticed now in retrospect is now that I'm familiar with a lot of those sound bites and songs and bands that he was having us listen to, he wasn't being intellectually honest in what he was telling us. He was misquoting certain lyrics, and he was saying things that weren't necessarily what was really going on. So there was a lot of kind of fear mongering there. But because this was slightly before the satanic panic stuff kicked in. But I'll also tell you this. He came into a Christian school where we were all 11 and 12 years old. We weren't listening to Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne and Quiet Riot. This is 1980s Christian America, where 10, 11, and 12-year-olds, for the most part, didn't listen to heavy metal.
Mhm.
Okay, for the most part. I know there's people out there that did. But the fact of the matter is, that was the day that that kind of music was introduced to our little prepubescent brains. And all of a sudden, You got a bunch of kids that haven't heard anything harder than Amazing Grace in their whole life, jammed out on a pipe organ. And this guy is blaring through the PA system, Crazy Train, and all of these like guitar riffs. You think every kid didn't go home wanting every one of those albums?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it makes
yeah.
me wonder what that agenda really was. Let's introduce the Christian kids to this music. I really feel that it was either an unintended consequence of some dear guy's heart, or that was part of the agenda. Because couple of years later, we were all in high school, and that's all we listened to by the time we got to high school. It was all like, I think Master of Puppets came out that year, and like everybody was on it, you know. And so um, I think I understood as a kid that music is very powerful, but I think that I just had it down in my mind that when you're going through puberty and everything is just like wild and chaotic, and you're just looking for experience, and you're looking for excitement, and you're looking for feeling, right? And you know, who's going to pass up an amazing guitar riff? It's just like made, it goes hand in hand with the teenage brain, right? And so I think I just kind of thought, oh, it was just puberty, it was just the age. But I will tell you, when I was in my 40s, I was talking to my brother on the phone, and we would talk about music all the time because, you know, and he had told me that he thought the best album that had ever been made was Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin. And I hadn't heard it, and my brother is somewhat estranged from me. And so when we got off the phone, I downloaded Physical Graffiti on iTunes, because I wanted something to be able to relate to with my brother. And the next time we talked, I wanted to really be able to engage him in conversation and get him out of his shell and have something that we could have in common or whatever. So here is my story about all of these alleged rumors about Jimmy Page and Satan's Tool Shed and Stairway to Heaven and the Backward Masking and Aleister Crowley's house and all this stuff, right?
Mhm.
I listened to Physical Graffiti. I'm a grown woman. I'm not in puberty. I'm 40 years old. Okay. Something came over my brain when I listened to that album. And I remember thinking, this is the greatest experience of my entire life, listening to this album. And I'm thinking to myself, what? It was very weird. So, long story short, I become obsessed with Led Zeppelin. I have every one of their albums. I'm listening to them all day at work with the earbuds, right? So I'm going to school. I'm going to night school at the time. And a friend of mine says, hey, yeah, I got a Catholic friend who challenged me to do Lent this year. You want to do it with me, Vic? And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. And he's like, what are you going to like abstain from? And I'm like, well, it's got to be Led Zeppelin because it's really the only thing I'm obsessed with. It's like the only thing that would be painful to give up at this point. So he's like, okay, okay. So I get through like the weekend, right? And I call him on a Monday, and I'm like, oh man, thank God that's over. I'm dying. Like I was literally like in withdrawal. And he's like, Vic, he's like, you idiot. He's like, Lent isn't a weekend. And I go, well, then how long is it? He goes, 40 days. And I'm like, what? Like I had no idea that I had actually committed to like not listening to Zeppelin for 40 days, right? So I go 40 days, and all day long I'm at work just thinking like counting down the days. I can't wait till I can listen to Led Zeppelin again. I had the whole song picked out. I had like one of those little iPod shuffles. So like, and I had the whole playlist like ready to go for that day. And so I get on day 41 and I get to work, and I'm so excited, and I get my little shuffle plugged in, and I put in my earbuds, and I'm listening to like my favorite song. And I was really confused, and I'm like, oh, this must not be, I must have gotten the title wrong. Like, this isn't the song. I didn't even recognize the song. I didn't even recognize it. I'm like, well, then what song was it? And I'm online, like looking through the track lists, and I'm like, well, which one is it? It's the one that was like really bluesy at the beginning. And it's like, okay, maybe it's this one. And I'm listening to it. I'm like, no, that's not it. I was perplexed. So I go on to the next song and I'm listening to the lyrics and I'm like, this is the dumbest, cheesiest lyric I've ever heard in my entire life. It was that stupid one, like it's really cliche now. I suppose at the time it was cutting edge. It's the one where he's singing about a girl, but the whole thing is like euphemisms about a car. And I'm like, this is so dumb. I couldn't even listen to it. So I fast forward to the third one. I got through the whole playlist and I couldn't stomach one song. I just thought this is the most basic, simple, not that 40-day fast from it broke this like spell. I was thinking it was the greatest thing in the world. So long story. I hope I didn't bore the viewers to death here. But what's crazy about that was I had to come to grips with the fact that there was no other way to explain it, that at the very least that music had captivated me for a while. It it very much was like a spell. It was very weird. Now I wasn't out robbing banks and getting pregnant, right? I was staying out of trouble, but it had me captivated and it was dominating my time and my thinking. And it was an extremely bizarre experience to me. And so when we talk about frequencies and our brain waves and these binaural beats, and then you start going into the weird conspiracies, about we take the master tapes up to the altar and pray over them and all that, that stuff starts to sound pretty, even for me, starts to sound a little kooky, like, oh, come on, they got better
Mm-hmm.
things to do. They're not doing that. Uh, but look at some of these musicians, look at the following they have. Look at how emotionally invested people are in these musicians that they've never met. And
The
what's going on?
the big one for my generation, and I know I'm gonna make some of the younger, like my friends that listen, mad, but the big one for my generation is Juice World. Uh, he OD'd a couple years ago, passed away, but like it is his fans. It is a cult.
Whoa.
It is they worship this guy, and like I remember when his music first came out, I was like, yeah, this is this is good. I'm listening to it and stuff like that, and then I got real tired of it, and I was like, okay, well then everybody started listening to it again, and I'm like, this is not good music. And everybody's like, oh, he's the greatest rapper of all time. Like people that listen to him listen to nothing else except for this guy.
Whoa.
He's been dead for 4 years now, 5 years now. And in Chicago, in a couple weeks, they're having a whole day in Chicago dedicated to this dude, giant festival.
Wow.
And his music is give it like he does rap about some like topics that a lot of people can relate to and stuff like that. And I'm not saying this dude's like he was a bad guy or anything like that by any means, because I don't know the person. I just know the music, but it's people are like act like they were best friends with him their whole life, like he's part of their family and
Yeah.
stuff. Like I've seen a lot of musicians die in my lifetime, but I've never seen so many people cry like they lost their brother or their
Wow.
like a family member when this dude did. And I just don't get it. Like I've never got sucked into the hype like that. So it's really strange to me. And like I will give it his beats and stuff on his, and that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
His beats and like his lyricism and his cadences are phenomenal. Like there's not really anything out there like that. So now I'm wondering is like, is it all part of like whether he knew intentionally or as his producers and beat makers and stuff like that, that was this all part of a plan? Because
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, he's dropped like 4 albums since he's passed away.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So they just keep on pumping out what they can get.
Yep. You know, I don't know if the music industry had to kind of like switch things up. Maybe they didn't because maybe the younger generations are different than my generation. You can help me out here. But when I was young, like I'm talking like 11 years old is when I kind of started having an interest in like pop and rock music and um from about 11 years old into my abs well, way into my 20s, we would absolutely obsess over certain musicians. And it's not like it doesn't still happen. Like, I mean, look at everything with like Taylor Swift and the Biebs and all that. Like, I know that young kids still get into all that, right? But there was a mystique about rock stars back in the 80s because there was no internet. And these rock stars, you knew very little about them. So they just seemed otherworldly. You knew that they probably had families and dogs and cats and brushed their teeth and did normal stuff, but you never saw them in that context. The paparazzi wasn't running around taking pictures of most of these people other than Michael Jackson, right? And
Mhm.
the stuff that you did read was a bunch of propaganda to just sell albums and weird stuff. And if you did get like a guitar magazine or something with one of the guys in there that you liked, all he was doing was talking about his gear or
Yeah.
he wasn't sitting there talking about who he was dating or like you didn't even know if these guys were dating or married or if they like you didn't know anything. And so they sort of like belonged to you. You could make them whatever you wanted to make them because there was no facts to get in the way of your fantasy. Uh, the best you could do is buy like a hit parader or a circus magazine or a Tiger Beat or a Teen Beat, and they would maybe talk about their projects or something like that. But they really were a lot more insulated before social media, and before internet. And what was really interesting is I I probably from about 13 years old up until late 30s, early 40s, even though they were churning out some pretty crappy music by that time, I always loved Metallica and I had seen them in concert a bunch of times and I'd been with them. I was with them since before the Master of Puppets album even came out. Like it was like a new release. And what I found after social media, after the internet, after you found out all the names of their wives and where they lived and what you could look at their house online and here's all their kids' names and here they are on social media and here's the family album and they became so boring when they just became normal people. And so in a way I thought, well, how is the music industry going to continue mesmerizing the masses when these people have come down to their own size and everybody's just like a normal human being? And so I'm really curious from your perspective as a young guy, what is luring people to these pop stars and these rock stars now? Because they're really not mysterious anymore. They're just regular, boring people. What's the lure?
So I would say that in itself is the lure, that they are just normal people and they all share every single aspects of their life. And a lot of them tell the stories of how they did get to where they're at. So I don't think it, I mean, there is obviously a form of they do want to follow them, you know, look up to them, obsess over them. But there's also that aspect of I can be just like them.
Okay, it's
So I need to,
achievable.
yes, I need to follow in their trails. I need to do what they need to do. To if they can do it, I can do it too. Because a big thing, especially in the hip hop rap scene right now, is SoundCloud. A lot of these big name rappers, especially the guy I just mentioned, like Juice World, he became big off this app, and that app's just one where you anybody can upload any song there and no fees or anything like that.
Wow.
Like
Okay.
I got back in high school, I had a few rap songs out there and stuff like that. But you know, everybody wanted everybody wants to live that lifestyle. And I think that's also a big part of the issue too, is because they see all this, they see the people as normal, like on the same level as them, even though they do lift them up. Um, with social media and things like that, they get to choose what aspects of their life you see. So you don't think about all the stuff they had to do to get there, or
Yeah.
what it is that they are doing to maintain that position. Because as we are, I'm not even going to say it's soft disclosure right now, because I feel like the valve's on about halfway open right now. Everything's
Yep.
pouring out of how these people got there.
Yep.
And the scary part to me, especially for my generation, is why, like, they're doing all this stuff, yet you still want to do that. People are willing to do that. And I mean, there's some good people out there that people do this to. So like for me in high school, and especially starting this podcast, a big person for me was Tony Merkel. I found the confessionals like a couple months, maybe a year after it started. I listened to a show. He helped me figure out a lot of stuff. I actually got saved um, due to a combination of a person in my life, Joel's test, Joel Thomas's testimony, and just all these stories I heard on the confessionals. I was like, man, I want to be like that guy too.
Yeah.
I know he's just a normal dude, but I mean, he talks. Tony's very humble about it, but he talks about the grind that he did and stuff. And I'm like, I can do that too. I can put out a show like that and help people. I can, you know,
Yeah.
help somebody that's going through something like that. And so I think there is a big benefit to this that's happening with everybody that 30 years ago would have seemed like unachievable being at the same level. But I also do believe the enemy does use that as well to just do his work, not
Yeah.
God's doing his work. Because I've also found a lot of people that have, especially in the Christian community, found all these podcasters, these preachers, or just fellow like evangelists or something like that are like, hey, this person is only like an hour or two away, let me see if I can reach out to them and connect to them, and they end up becoming best friends and stuff like that, and God does his work through them. So there is a good and bad. I hope that answered your question without getting.
Yeah. No, it absolutely did. And yeah, and it's interesting too. I like what you said there because of course, when we were kids, we all wanted to be famous rock stars too. Everybody in high school had that guitar or that drum kit and had a band and we're going to move to California when they graduated. Like it's always been like the teenage dream, right? But there there was really only a small percentage of people that actually were going to put their money where their mouth were and move to California and try to actually do it, right? And you're right. It does, it's far more obtainable. Now, the fame might not be far more obtainable, but the access and the distribution is far more obtainable than it was in our day and age when you had to have a recording contract or something like that, right?
Mhm.
There was no internet or YouTube and all of that kind of stuff. You could get a camcorder that weighed more than you did and like make a video or a mixtape or something, right? Get it, but you'd have to get it in the right hands. And so that does answer the question. And I'm just curious now that we are getting a glimpse into the price that a lot of these A-list rock stars had to pay to get to where they're at, and the sort of membership initiation things that they have to do to get into that, $30 million club and all that. Is that going to dissuade young people from still wanting to pursue? Or because the nature of when we're young, we think we're going to be that one exception that I'm going to make it to the top and I'm not going to have to sell my soul and do all that stuff.
I don't like being pessimistic by nature, and I also, before I make this comment, I know God can do anything and will do anything, and his kingdom will come, he will return. So no matter what happens, at the end of the day, Christ is coming back. He's already won. He's already won.
Hmm.
But I, unfortunately, just what I've seen is there is a lot of people that are willing to do that, and there's a lot of people that do not have a problem doing that whatsoever. I I know people who have said they would easily kill somebody to get what they want, or I've noticed just in like job fields and stuff I've had people nowadays have no problem backstabbing people
Mm.
to climb up the ladder because that's all anybody wants. And kind of like to go on your go back a second, I it's so much. I think it is so much easier now to achieve fame, long lasting fame. That's different, but it's a lot easier to get your 15 minutes of fame right now.
Oh yeah.
It
Yep.
and people are okay with just having 15 minutes, you know. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I used to think like that too. There was a point when I was an atheist where I was hardcore atheist too, but
Mm.
there was a point where I was having a conversation with somebody, and I was like, if all this stuff is real, I'd much rather sell my soul to the devil than worship God, and
Wow.
because
Yeah.
I'll get what I want. Because I used to only care about money, women, and stuff like that.
Yep. Yep.
I was a very, not to pat myself on the back, but I was raised like a very humble person. Do kind to others. So I still believed in all the morals of the Bible and stuff, even though I wasn't raised on it. Looking back at it, I did follow a lot of the commandments and stuff like that.
Mm.
But there
Mm.
was that part of me inside of me that was willing, like, if I wanted to achieve that kind of stuff, who knows, maybe I would. I don't think I would kill somebody, but I would throw somebody underneath the bus at a
Yeah.
job position or something like that to climb up. And I, there's a lot of people like that right now. Now I'm to the point where it's like, hey, if God makes it happen, it happens. Like with this podcast,
Yeah.
oh, if I only have one listener, I don't care. Still gonna put it out if that one person it helps that one person or that one person's entertained or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, this making the limelight available to the masses, you know. Uh it's a double-edged sword because there are a lot of people out there that really do have stuff to say. And I think that one of the maybe the law of unintended consequences with all of this, they probably thought, okay, because these social platforms, they're making money off of us, right? So that's fine. But the fact is, I wonder if they knew the power of the masses when we all started getting together and talking and exchanging notes and figuring things out. Like, I wonder if they saw that peace coming, because I kind of feel like the internet it has become something bigger than I think what anyone ever imagined, by way of breaking mind control that a lot of us have been under our entire lives.
I would agree. I mean, if it wasn't for the internet, chances are I probably wouldn't have been saved. You know, I had people my whole entire life telling me, "Oh, go follow Jesus."
Mm-hmm.
I went to church youth nights in high school. I went for the wrong reasons, but I still went. But it was hearing these people that I've never met before that
Mm.
chipped away at me enough to where when the God placed the right person in my life to sit me down, one that I
Yeah.
respected enough to sit down and listen,
Yeah.
that I did, and the, you know I was saved. And I've I've heard countless other testimonies that are very very similar to that. So, like you said, it is a double edged sword. But I do believe as well that the internet was a, a tame beast in a cage. They thought they could control it. They thought it was acting nice enough to where they could let it out, roam around for a minute, and then the second they did, it just ran rampant. And you know, I almost think of it as like the Leviathan.
Mm,
There's nothing that can defeat it except for God.
yeah,
God is the only one that the Leviathan bows down to.
yeah,
So
yep.
God God can take this weapon that was formed against us and use it for his glory. So I
Amen. Amen. I think what's cool about it too is the internet gives the spotlight to people that would never have gotten the spotlight in the old world, right? The deplorable masses get to say their piece. And what's fun to me is the media is really good at giving the cameras and the microphones to the Christians that irritate everybody, including other Christians, right? And
yeah,
so our public face is all of the people where you're dying of embarrassment just watching them. You get the secondhand embarrassment, and it's all of just the cliche ones with, all of the predictable, narrow-minded answers of, and oh, look at that pink hair and earring, it's all that kind of stuff, right?
yeah,
And what's amazing, I'm sure many of us Christians have had the experience where when you actually meet a real world, like atheist or agnostic or skeptic, a lot of us in school and the workplace have had the experience where people will say, well, you're not like other Christians. You're cool. I like you. You're not like other Christians. And you have to tell them, I'm actually exactly like most Christians. You've never met a real one. You see these caricatures on TV, these one-dimensional, like predictable, they're these characters, right? And so what's cool is if you spend your whole life thinking Christians are this certain thing, uh, and then you're on the internet and you're seeing a Tony Merkel or a Joel Thomas, and you're like, no, wait, what? And your paradigm gets blown because like this is someone who's young, this is someone who's cool, this is someone who has all the same like interests as me. They like music and they're creative and they like film and cryptids and wait a minute, you can't be a Christian, you can't like that album or whatever. And so it really does disarm, I think, the skeptics when, and believe me, there's a lot of Christians on the internet that should get off. You're not doing God or yourself any favors, by spouting your stuff. But I do think that it's cool that there really is no such thing as a categorical Christian. We're unique, and even you put 10 Christians in a room, you're going to get 10 different opinions on everything. So I do kind of like some of the unintended consequences of the internet, and I love hearing the stories about people who have come to Christ through it and who have gotten a different perspective, and it thrills me to no end to see the younger generation doing it because they have so much more passion and energy. You just get tired when you get old. I haven't gotten cynical at all. But I'm nowhere near the end of my life, right? I still feel very young and like I got a lot of years left in me. But uh, all of us from the older generations, it does us the greatest amount of joy to see that the next generation has taken the baton and the name of Christ is still going to go out. We can take that mantle and pass it on. We can go on. We did our part. We played our little part, and it's not going to die with us. And that's extremely encouraging for those of us as we're getting older and as some of us get more cynical, more tired. And so and I don't often get the opportunity. I talk to a lot of guys in like their 30s and 40s, and every once in a while, I get to talk to some people in their that's still in their teens or in their 20s, and it just rejuvenates me,
that's awesome.
especially when they're full of passion and full of truth, and they have a desire and a fearlessness, like, hey, I'm going to preach the truth, and I don't care if people want to give me little thumb down emblems and all this stupid stuff. It doesn't matter. I know who I am, and I'm confident in who I am, and I'm going to do this.
It it's first of all, amen to all that. And it it it's really nice that there is people like you that are in the older generation, to especially somebody like me, because especially coming into this podcast, it's only been out a couple months now.
Mm,
It's like you guys have been passing the batons down. It's like, all right, because I was going to start this a couple years ago, and I was like, no, I just waited, and then God made it the perfect time to, and I was like, all right, well, this must be my time. And now I'm starting to realize, like, all right, there's a lot of people who are starting to, they're getting really like 80s, 70s, 80s right now. They're starting to get out. So the 40s through 60s are going to move up there. And it's just like, all right, baton's being passed down. And, you know, I feel, at least in my life, sometimes it's easier to hear things from a younger person around the same age as you. Sometimes it's nice to get the elder wisdom. So I don't know what God's plan is for me in this, but it's nice knowing I have, even if they don't know me, it's nice knowing that there's the people who are bearing the torch right now, getting ready to pass it down, and I can just learn from them. And so when my time comes to hold the torch, I know what to do for the next one. And I mean,
yeah,
if we look at it biblically, isn't that what Christ did?
absolutely.
Go out and make disciples.
Absolutely.
That's the number one rule. You can follow a lot of things. You can try to be as sinless as possible. We're all going to sin. It's our fallen nature. It is like that. But the one thing that we can do, that we have full control over doing, is to go out and make disciples and share the word of Christ.
Amen. Amen. I love the book of Titus because it really does talk about how the older people in the church, the older men and women, going to teach the younger, but then the younger are they're in the middle. They get to teach those even younger than them, but then they're also looking up to the sages and the mentors. And it's kind of this new trend within the last like 20, 30, 40 years. I don't know. When I was a kid, we knew about the baby boomers, you know what I mean? But every generation didn't, like, I don't know how old I was the first time I heard Gen X, but I was like way too old to care what generation I was by the time I finally heard it, you know? And it's almost like, okay, we've we've pit men and women against each other, and we've pit black and white against each other, and we've pit gay and straight against each other. What are other groups that we can just needlessly pit against one another? Oh, let's start categorizing people by their age, and then trying to rank in order who's coolest and who's better, and who's the most level-headed and who's the smartest. And oh my gosh, like I just refuse to play that game. It is anti-biblical what they're doing because in the church we are a body, which means if every single person who professes faith in Jesus Christ is part of one collective body, that means some body parts are baby boomers, some are Gen X, some are Gen Alpha, Gen Y. Like we all are one cohesive whole. We need each other. We need those gray hairs. We need the people that remembered World War II and the previous generation. And we need the younger people to carry on the name of Jesus, to carry on the torch. And so I I hope that the church is doing a good job avoiding all of this age baiting garbage because I have so many friends in every category, and I can honestly tell you when I've got some friends on on social media that are teenagers. I've got friends in their 30s. I absolutely don't feel older or wiser when I'm with them. It's not a conscious thought, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I just think every generation is so unique. And that's why I've really enjoyed talking to you because I have the opportunity to talk to teenagers and I have a lot of people in my life who are in their 30s and I really don't get to talk to people in their 20s very often. So this is just really fun for me.
I'm having a blast too. It, but
Mm,
you're right, and I have the same view. So I've always been, even when I was really little, I always wanted to hang out with the older. people. I wanted to hang out with the adults. I just
Yeah.
connect. I grew up really quick, so I was always associated with the adults too, but I always want to be part of their conversations because I got to learn about things and talk about things that I don't get to talk about with people my age.
Yeah.
And like a perfect example of something that happened recently was at the Small Town Monster Fest in June. I was talking with some people we met. It was like me, Shane, Kevin from Where the Weird Ones Are,
Yeah.
and some other people, and we had, they're in their 30s. Some of the people were in like their late 40s, 50s, and then I had Kevin's 15-year-old son sitting next to me, and we were all just talking, and
Oh,
I was talking to Kevin's son just like I was talking to Kevin because I'm like right in the middle between. I'm just as far in age from Kevin as I am from his son.
yeah.
So it was like I'm learning things from both. I didn't feel the age gap or anything like that. It was just adults, and I'll count Kevin's son as an adult. And
Hmm.
that's but we were just all talking. It didn't matter the age. We just want to talk about Bigfoot. We want to talk about. I snuck a little bit of God in there. I gave a little sprinkled some gospel in there, and
Yeah.
it, we just had fun, and that's how things should be.
Absolutely.
We
Yep.
shouldn't gatekeep by age. That's one thing I can't stand because, especially in this community, there's some old heads that don't want to share their knowledge and stuff, and unfortunately, it's going to die with them. Then you got the people that are like, "Hey, I can't tell you this thing because I have an NDA, but the second that's up, I'll tell you all about it. But here's all this to fill you in.
Yeah.
Start a building block. It's
Yeah. Yep.
community.
Yeah, I really regret, when you're young and you show up like at a family gathering or something, you're just excited to tell grandma and grandpa about everything going on in your life and your new toys and showing them everything. And they start to talk and they're more contemplative. It takes them longer to get a thought out and you're impatient and you're on to the next thing. And I so regret not getting more information out of my grandparents and hearing more about what the world was like when they were young. And uh, oh man, you really do start to feel a loss as you get older that you missed out on opportunities to be connected to the world that is no longer here.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and Gen X is like a really cool place to be hovering because we do remember the old world. Like our childhood, it was the old world. It was telephones hanging on the wall and it was typewriters and we did know the world before the internet and social media and what it's become. And so I am kind of happy that I got to have my foot in both worlds and but I'm not one of these types that as I see the world changing, I'm begrudging it. Like in my day, we didn't do this and we didn't do that and we rode our bikes and we didn't have to worry about like for me, it makes me realize how special the world was. There's a world that doesn't exist anymore, and I'm so glad I got to see it. But you know what? 30 years from now, you're going to be saying the same thing because your world's not going to be the same anymore either.
Yeah, I'm already seeing it. So I was the very, very, yeah, I'm 24, but I was the very, very end of VCRs, the transition to the thing. I still remember having a phone on the wall and stuff like that, but that's
Good.
also,
Yeah.
lower middle class family. So we didn't quite move as fast as some of the other households, but we got there. Dad,
Oh, man.
dad busted his butt every day at work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. I remember the day my dad, this is probably like 81, 80. I don't know. I remember my dad bringing home the first cordless telephone. They were called briefcase phones back then. It was very James Bond. And I mean, the thing was like a cement cinder block, you know, you'd be holding it up like this. But I will tell you that that was like I said, like 80 or 81. So he had this, we didn't call it a cell phone, but he had a cordless phone number. And
Ooh.
I will tell you, he's the only guy I know that still has his original cordless phone number to this day. It's the
Man,
same number. It's never changed.
that's how my grandparents are. They've had the same phone number for like 40 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. You know,
I don't know how you can do that with a cell phone. It's absolutely amazing.
that's insane. That's awesome though. That I mean,
Oh,
people take that for granted.
yeah.
It's little things like that are awesome. He's preserving the history.
Yeah. Oh man, I cannot even believe. Now I'm talking like an old person. I can't believe. So this was probably like 77, 78. And the whole family drove to the mall. And my mom and brother and I waited in the car while my dad, who was probably still in his 20s, maybe a little older than you. Dad runs inside and he comes out giddy as a 10-year-old. And we get home, and what he had purchased was a video game console that was basically just one dial, and all you could play on it was Pong.
Hey,
There no cartridges. You just wired that into the TV, and you sat there for hours just playing Pong.
I've played my fair share of Pong.
And I just cannot even believe with the video games now. Like, oh my gosh.
They're crazy. One of the ones I've been playing recently, it's I can make my character look exactly like me, and you can barely tell it's a video game.
Oh my word.
It's insane.
That's crazy.
And there is some to get back into it a ton. There is some spiritual implications with that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's there's a lot there, and I've been trying to be more careful with what I consume.
Yeah. It
But
does make you wonder because everything innovates and things innovate faster now. And so when you look at the VR and the AR stuff, what what's the end game? Where do they stop? What is this eventually going to become?
you're gonna be in it yourself, or like, not to get too nerdy, but I watched a lot of the anime stuff, and there's one in there where it's like actually it came out like 14 years ago, but it takes
Uh-oh.
place in 2024, and they literally put a thing on their head, and their whole consciousness and everything, like they feel pain, they need to eat, they feel everything,
Mm,
and they just wear a headset and go inside games and stuff like that. That is that's the only place it can go next, is
yeah.
literally transporting ourselves there. And
Yep.
I guarantee it'll have to do with frequencies and stuff like that. Now I do like Elon Musk, and but there's some things with him that are iffy for
I
sure,
know.
and that Neuralink is the first step towards that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's definitely a spook factor with him. And, whether or not he's a gatekeeper or not, he is giving us valid information.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, this whole AI thing, oh man, there's no such thing as science fiction anymore.
No.
I mean, you just take the fiction out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been that way though. I mean, if you look at the Bible, or you look at ancient text, or just look at ancient civilizations and stuff like that,
Yeah.
this stuff's always been there in one way or another.
Oh yeah. Oh
Ain't no,
yeah.
ain't nothing new under the sun.
There's not the out of place objects that those are fascinating to study.
Oh, I pray one day that I have the ability to go and travel and see all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know.
Well, I think that would be a good place to start winding things down. We covered a lot, and I guarantee there's a lot more we could talk about. But before we get out here, why don't you tell everybody who you are again and where they can find you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Vicki Joy Anderson, author of They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis. VickiJoyAnderson.com is the website, and Vicki Joy Author is where you can get me on Instagram and TikTok.
Sweet. Everybody go check her out. Follow her on Instagram. One of the best Instagram pages out there. I'm entertained almost every day. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was an absolute blast talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's so fun getting to talk about different things and getting to kind of explore the music and some of the technology and things has been a blast. I don't often get to talk about that stuff. So thanks so much for having me on.
Anytime. Thank you again. All
You're
right,
welcome.
guys. If you enjoyed this episode, you know the deal. Like, share, follow with all your friends. If you got any encounters or anything you'd like to report, get a hold of me. You can find me at my link tree in the description. Find me on Instagram at Midwest Mythos. Feel free to message me about anything. Or if you're a researcher, author, or anything like that, want to come on the show, let me know. Happy to have you on the show. With that being said, guys, have an absolutely blessed week. And till next time, bye.